In general, the question always comes up, will sales become obsolete because of AI? That's complete nonsense, in my opinion.
Especially in sales, in the sales process, personal contact is what really matters.
So much time is spent on this process, which almost every sales team has to deal with.
Aren't we risking that the sales process becomes less human because of AI?
You always have to, and you probably did this too, apply some common sense to it. Of course. Does it fit or does it not?
A warm welcome to all our viewers and listeners to a new episode of our podcast, Digital.Decoded. Dear Mario, as always, it's a real pleasure to welcome you here today to discuss what I think is an incredibly exciting topic. How do we actually tune our sales with AI? We want to tune everything today. We want to tune our whole lives with AI. Today, though, we're focusing specifically on the sales process and AI. And I think both of us can share plenty of examples and bring in our experience. So I'm really looking forward to this episode. As always, if you enjoy the episode, feel free to share it. If you have any feedback, please feel free to reach out to us, subscribe to our channel on the various podcast platforms. We really appreciate interaction and feedback. So Mario, first over to you. How can AI be helpful in sales? Everyone wants to become faster, more efficient, better. So what do we do with AI now?
Yes, thank you, André. Great topic from my perspective because our three main topics are leadership, sales, and AI, and all three really contribute directly to this topic. So let's start with this topic of tuning. You just mentioned it. Right now, we have a lot of customers coming to us and saying, I've just read something else about AI and I want to use it. Many are already doing something, but the question is always, how can I implement it across the board? And it's very important, if you believe the studies these days, a lot of people are implementing various use cases, but many aren't actually generating the value that AI can bring. And I think that's a really important topic. And if we now look at the topic or at sales, then I believe, and I also have a few use cases, I can share a bit from our own experience in a moment, that you can really create these added values. So you can achieve what you mentioned, you can become more efficient, more effective, and very importantly, you can also significantly increase user acceptance. And so the employee really notices something from AI, we'll get to that later in the episode, and truly sees it as an added value. That's great. Who wouldn't want to do that?
So I absolutely agree with you. I'd like to begin by putting a thesis statement out there, especially in sales and particularly in the sales process. Personal contact is truly what matters most. Aren't we risking that the sales process becomes less human because of AI?
I actually believe the opposite is true. AI now makes it possible, I say now quite deliberately, because it took some time for AI and also voice AI to develop, but now it enables me to finally have the time to really focus on the customer again. Yes, many salespeople, and I wouldn't exclude us from that either. These days you have to do so much admin work. Yes, you have so many requirements, especially in large corporations, all the things you have to do. You hardly even get to do any actual sales anymore. So what you just mentioned is only becoming possible again thanks to AI. Yes, because today there are studies that say out of a 40-hour work week or all the studies agree, maybe nowadays only 10 hours are left for the salesperson. Sometimes it's 15, depending on the study, that are actually available for real customer interaction. And that's exactly my approach. You have to make sure that salespeople get more time for exactly that, because that's the productive time.
Exactly. I'm glad you said that. Yes, because I really believe that successful sales can only work when people interact with each other. And what you're saying is that you actually want to take the burden off sales employees when it comes to administrative tasks, tasks that aren't necessarily value adding, where a lot can be automated, where a lot can be compensated by AI so that I have more time for the customer again, right?
Yes, absolutely right. And I really appreciate a claim from Microsoft, which, as they put it, is do more with less.
Yes.
And that's exactly the crucial point, because if we look at most organizations today, and I include myself in that, so we're private equity backed. No one comes along and says, hey, Mario, you had $1 million in budget last year, and now I'll give you 1.5 million because you're so great and doing such a fantastic job. No, everyone says, you get the same budget, but I want at least 20% more out of it. Or you get less budget, but have to deliver the same results. And that's exactly the point, and that's why I find this claim, do more with less, so very fitting. That's our task today, keywords being efficiency and effectiveness, which we all have to fulfill now. We actually don't have more resources, and sometimes that's also due to the war for talent, which we've already talked about several times. A sales representative, a good sales representative, these days knows their own value, of course. And on the other hand, the good salespeople can basically pick and choose their jobs. That means sometimes you can't even get the good ones at all. So you really have to make sure to support the good ones you do have as best as possible. First, so that they stay, and second, so that they can do what they enjoy doing, relationships.
Yeah, that really resonates with me right now, because I think it was the week before last that I gave a talk. And in the talks where I speak about leadership, I always describe with a certain dose of sarcasm the everyday work life I had as a manager in large companies. It usually starts with deleting emails in the morning, then dealing with some pointless process, then having to wrestle with some Excel spreadsheet before you finally get to meet a customer or maybe even make a decision, which are actually the value creating processes. If we focus on the sales process now, Mario, do you have any examples where sales employees are already able to benefit from AI today?
Yes, I have some very concrete examples that we've already successfully implemented with customers, which is important. These aren't just examples that work on paper. So let's get started. There are little helpers that handle routine tasks for you. For example, Microsoft Copilot is one such solution that helps you pre-write emails or even take over certain activities. Yes, so you receive an email and it's already assigned in the CRM and all those things that sometimes happen manually, but nowadays really don't have to be done manually anymore. That's one thing. The second thing is, often in sales, when you go to a customer, you prepare yourself, and then there are so-called, well, we call it chat on your own data. That means basically you can look at where we might have done something similar before, and then you can make the knowledge within the company accessible in a completely different way, really securely encapsulated internally with ChatGPT, where you then get very concrete suggestions about what you can offer the customer. Thirdly, for example, you have things like preparing for and following up on visits. But when you're sitting in the car on the go, who doesn't know that situation? You're on your way to the customer and then you think, oh man, when was the last order again? What was the price back then? And then it just comes to you on the way to the customer. And today, of course, you still call the sales back office. That means there's someone sitting there, a human resource who, of course, has to be paid. And on the other hand, you also have to be lucky that the person is actually available at that moment. In the future, you can handle things like this with voice AI, as it's called. Technically, that's already possible today. We're currently recording these use cases, and what happens then is that you basically have a voice bot that's available all the time, no matter if you call at night or whenever you're on the road, and it can access the data and give you the right information. By the way, the first prototypes show that the quality of the information is even better than that provided by humans after a short period of time. This way,
I can easily imagine that, especially since it will, of course, be built on all kinds of data that the company has about these customers, and sometimes even supplemented by publicly available data. I can really imagine that. But now, Mario, to me, that sounds pretty complicated. First, you have to create such a foundation within the company, because it really does come down to data quality, right?
yes, that's always said, and it's true. But by now, of course, you can also see that many companies have moved the whole topic to the cloud or have moved their data to the cloud as well. So a lot of data is already quite good today. And on the other hand, you also have to say that companies are well aware that they need good data for AI. I haven't found a single company yet, including our own, where there is 100% data quality, but that's always been the case. Yes, so even 10, 15, 20 years ago, I was already working on projects where you always did these data projects so that CRM would run well, but still the data quality was rubbish. So, and I think that's not an argument for not doing AI, but rather the question is, what can AI actually achieve here? What does it find, and does it also find good data? And especially in many companies that, for example, have a lot of contracts or a customer history, it actually works much better than you might think.
And what would you say now? Let's say I'm in, I don't know, a somewhat larger mid-sized company. My data is in the cloud. Data quality is well so-so. And now I want to not only optimize my sales process with AI, but also relieve my sales staff of some of the administrative burden. That would be a first use case, a first project that I could implement relatively quickly.
I have a great use case, assuming that, and I would say this is still the case in 80 to 90% of sales departments. You receive some form of external unstructured email communication. That's a use case we introduce to our clients because today what happens is An email comes in somewhere, then at best it's put into some kind of mailbox, and then someone has to go through it, pick it up, read it, check what attachments are included, and so on. These could be claims processes, but they could also be completely normal customer inquiries, leads, for example, or other things. And nowadays, you can really use AI to handle this massively and very, very well. You take these emails, retrieve them, check, for example, if the customer already exists in the CRM, and then they are automatically assigned. The text is read, even if, for example, we always call this unstructured, with 3 different requests in one email. A classic example: I want to report a claim to you. I saw something on your website and would like a quote. And by the way, I have an address change for one of my 17 offices. Yes, so these are multiple requests, and in the past, you really couldn't handle them very well with traditional methods. AI can do that today and saves an incredible amount of admin work. Just imagine if it takes you 15 minutes to process an email, and now this is where it gets interesting. The AI does it so quickly, including sending a confirmation to the customer, that you actually have to build in routines to delay it. Because as a human, you're just not used to getting such a fast response that's also correct. Yes, exactly. And that's actually what's so fascinating, I think. These days, we as humans can hardly keep up with the speed anymore. But to get back to your question, that's a process you can really implement end to end very well. Almost everyone gets these kinds of email inquiries nowadays, and as a small side effect, emails are still a common entry point for malware today. Yes, we just ran another test ourselves, and people still click on those links. They enter their credentials and all sorts of things, and you can basically imagine it as an extra layer, meaning your cybersecurity is also increased or improved.
I think that's a great example, especially with the added note that companies have the opportunity to make sure this entry point isn't so wide open. Cybersecurity is an important topic. And as you mentioned, Mario, many of these administrative tasks, 3 business transactions in a single email, used to take a lot of time to process manually operating the different systems. Now, this is recognized automatically. And for the downstream systems, that's really great. I think it's a very fitting example because it once again reduces the workload for individual employees, giving them more time to focus on the customer and on their actual work. I have
Another great example: some people are still hesitant, thinking, "Oh, if I use AI directly in customer interactions, who knows how that will go?" Or you encounter strong resistance from the sales team. And there's another great example, which everyone knows. So if I have a somewhat larger organization, even as a mid-sized company, let's say I have around 200 salespeople worldwide, sometimes more, sometimes less, one topic that always comes up is commissions. And I found a really wonderful and recent example of this, which IBM also presented at the event I attended just 2 weeks ago. They built a practical chatbot where you could enter questions about your commissions. So why was this counted in now? Why not? Then the chatbot essentially explains to you in a clear and detailed manner why your commission statement appears the way it does, and so on and so forth. And again, the overall experience shows that the accuracy of the answers is even better than that of humans, and user satisfaction is higher compared to before. I think that's also a great example.
a phenomenal example because I can remember my own time in sales. Back then, you always had to go into all those reports, portals, Excel spreadsheets, and constantly try to figure out how much your bonus or commission was. I don't know how it was or is for you. I never really managed to figure it out and eventually just gave up. But if you have a chatbot that can track all of that and explain it to you in a way you understand, that's a significant time saver.
Yeah, and another point, when do you actually do this, Andre? I don't know when you used to do it. I always end up doing it late at night because during the day I'm out selling or on the weekend, but then there's no one from the sales back office around to answer my questions. They're all at home and I can't reach them anymore. So you sit there frustrated as a salesperson, and after all, we're all emotional people. Then you get upset about why this great deal you worked so hard for isn't showing up in your commission statement. And all of that, well, as we've said before, people stress out organizations and organizations stress out people. The stress that the organization causes you as a person can be managed with AI, and you can have a much smoother experience.
For example, especially if you do this over the weekend, you come into the office Monday morning already fired up and say, now I want to see my deal here. Maybe you even call up the sales back office or HR. But if you can clarify and have all of this explained to you over the weekend, you'll obviously be in a much better mood on Monday morning. Yeah, I thought so too.
I thought it was a great example, though, as I said, it's not originally from me. In this case, it comes from IBM. They use it themselves, and I learn something new every day from it. And I think if we look at sales now, maybe to mention another example, AI forecasting. You guys did that at Microsoft too, and you can probably say a lot more about it than I can. But it's the same game every year. You sit down and plan out all your customers, and so much time is spent on this process, which almost every sales unit or larger organization has. And nobody really likes doing it. There are always arguments. Management thinks the numbers are too low, but from the employee's perspective, they're too high. And when AI comes into play, it's a whole different story. Tell us about it. You guys did that too, right?
Absolutely. And I want to start the story a bit earlier because, of course, I also encounter organizations, Mario, you probably know them too, where we used to do annual sales P&L. That means there was a nice process. We always called it bottom-up planning, where the sales division heads and so on were involved. And of course, it was always very, very conservative. I mean, it's obvious you don't want to set a high budget. And then there was a top-down planning process, which I'll say deliberately was done by someone else. And the two never matched. There was always a huge gap. And I remember there were endless discussions, really emotional debates and stress to somehow bring them together. It took a lot of energy, a lot of time. You produced a lot of slides, you did a lot of work, you discussed a lot, thought up many arguments, and so on and so forth. It was dead time that you didn't spend on the customer, purely internal time. And when we then made some changes at Microsoft, we didn't just change the forecasting process, but we also changed another process. I'll get to that in a moment. But just making that change took an incredible amount of stress out of the system simply by saying the data is in the system, not in PowerPoint, not in an Excel spreadsheet or wherever else, but in the system. And of course, the system then suggests to both sides what the budget for the next year should look like. But that also means, Mario, that the data quality in the CRM system has to be 100% accurate. That also changes your leadership behavior again. Which data do you rely on? How do you conduct sales reviews, or do you even still do sales reviews at all? Because it was really only about someone explaining or interpreting the numbers, or however they ended up in the Excel spreadsheet or PowerPoint. But we actually changed this process as well, saying that we no longer conduct sales reviews in the traditional sense. Instead, we focus on leading indicators. For example, how much pipeline has a particular sales employee generated over the past week, which will hopefully at some point lead to revenue. And we concentrated on specific customers, use cases, and challenges so that a substantive discussion was possible. A great example as well of how AI can help entirely and completely transform the discussion in such a sales process and actually add value.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And as I said at the beginning, I'm really looking forward to this episode because it brings together leadership, sales, and AI. And this is a perfect example of how that works. Yes, I also have to, in order to really come from practical experience, not just use AI, but I also have to rethink things. We once had an episode, you have to forget what you have learned, Yoda's quote, and that's exactly how it is. Yes, so forecasting itself, even in many or most organizations today, still means that employees sit down and plan, then they somehow get an Excel sheet, and then they have to fill something out. And in the end, no one really looks at it, and so on and so forth. This whole process needs to be completely rethought and made simpler. Then, of course, you also get buy-in from the employees, because that's when you really get the added value from AI. That's also a great discussion to have. All the time you save, you can use that time with customers to generate more revenue, and in doing so, as an organization, you achieve more. And that brings us back to the point, do more with less.
And you know, from my own experience back then, of course, all the salespeople used to complain about the quotas and the budgets. That was always the same, because if you're a good salesperson, they're always too high. But, you know, the discussions, and especially the time you used to spend on those discussions, suddenly became minimal because everyone knew, okay, this is based on data. Maybe you can still add a bit of personal judgment, but that's it. And that, of course, made the discussions within the team much simpler.
On the other hand, you also have to be fair. The business model, or rather the business models you had, or in your case, you were part of Microsoft, are naturally well suited for this because you have great historical data, you have, let's say, contract durations extending into the future, and so on. In other business models like ours nowadays, it's much, much more difficult. In IT services, for example, as we've seen with the global economy, sometimes your revenue just drops off. I also have clients, for example, in the automotive sector, who said that from 1 month to the next, they lost 70% of their revenue. You know these examples too. And I think it's always a question. On paper, everything always looks so nice, but the real test comes later, whether AI can really deliver on that every time. I firmly believe in it, but in general, the question always comes up. Will sales become obsolete because of AI? In my view, that's total nonsense, just like leadership won't become obsolete because you always have to, and you probably did this too, take another look at it with common sense. Does it fit or not?
You're absolutely right about what you said, and you shouldn't confuse that. AI isn't going to make these jobs obsolete at the end of the day. Not at all. We're talking about sales, about selling. Sales or business deals are made between people, and they will continue to be made between people in the future. There are very few exceptions, online subscriptions for easily explained products, and so on. But I would say whenever it comes to complex products, whenever it comes to services at the end of the day, then business is done between people, and I am firmly convinced that this will remain the case. And on the other hand, what you said, this human intuition, we already talked about that in a previous episode, the ability to put things into perspective, to bring in a dose of experience and intuition, that's absolutely essential in leadership and in sales as well. I see it exactly the same way.
Yes, and what's always interesting with forecasting, just to stick with that example, is that you always have your usual suspects. One person always sets their forecast too high, another is too conservative, and so on. The machine, of course, filters that out, but on the other hand, as a leader, you always have a sense for these things. Well, what does he need in order to feel challenged, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
right. Yes, exactly. Especially
The top performers, right? If they always hit their numbers, the machine doesn't know that, but as a leader, you know there's actually more potential there. You have to set
higher.
goals for them, then they feel challenged and they actually feel even better.
Mario, I think that's a great closing statement. AI in sales is helpful, and we've just heard some great examples from you where a lot of administrative work that takes time, costs money, drains energy, work that many people don't enjoy, and that leads to frustration and emotions, can really be minimized and optimized with technology, in this case with AI. But still, that doesn't change one thing. Sales remains a human business, and leadership also remains human. The human component is still extremely important in this environment, and I believe it's all about the combination, about connecting the human aspect with technology. And I think that's a great closing statement, don't you, Mario?
Yes, absolutely. That's why I also talk about the intelligent workplace in sales. How do I bring intelligence to people? And to go back to your opening words, I'd say, how do I tune my sales with AI? That's a colloquial way of putting it. Tuning always means making something better, and that's exactly what it is. But tuning also means there's a lot of emotion involved. It remains human, and it will always stay human. AI won't replace all of us, at least not in the next few years. And I think if she replaces us, we'll all be gone anyway.
I think so too. Nice, Mario. Thank you very much for the fascinating discussion, dear viewers and listeners. As I said at the beginning, feel free to like, feel free to comment, give us feedback, and subscribe to the channel. And for the two of us, Mario, there's only one thing left to say: stay human. I'm looking forward to the next episode.
Yes, stay human.